everyone! Today we're here on behalf of Child Evangelism Fellowship, CEF, and today we are putting the memory verse on a visual aid. This is the size of the Bristol board that I'm using, but for the purposes of this video, I'm using a smaller scale. So I'm going to use two different sizes of visual aid, which will turn out to be 17 inches by 22.5 inches, and the other size is 11.25 by 22.5 inches. So when I make those measurements, I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to have two different size visual aids to use for my memory verse. So the slimmer one is the 11.5 by 22.5, 11.25. And the bigger size is 17 by 22.5 inches. My border is 1.25 inches, measuring all the way around. Now remember, this is a smaller scale. So on the actual Bristol board sheet, you're going to actually measure 1.25 inches. Then, in order to know how my words are going to fall in my lines and how many lines I'm going to use, I'm writing it out on a separate scrap. So I'll know exactly how my words are going to fall, and I can average how much space I would need. We must factor in the actual address of the verse, which I forgot to do, so I'm adding it at the top and bottom. And those will count as lines as well. So I'm adding in my lines, and the total number of lines I have now is 9, which is a very difficult number for me to calculate to fit on my space. Some people are better at math than I am, so I'm sure y'all could work it out. I'm more of an average kind of person. So these are the measurements for your common letters, your capital letters, the spaces between your lines, and your space between your words. If you like to do things very exact, you can follow these measurements. If you're more like me, you can use it as a guide and adjust to suit. Because remember, all your verses do not have the same amount of words. So, and all your verses, it's not the same size. So, you will have to adjust to suit. But generally, you should not go smaller than the measurements given. So that's why I say to use it as a guide. You can make adjustments to suit, but do not go smaller, because remember, it's a visual aid and your students need to see from a distance. They need to be able to understand and make out all the words. So I've drawn my lines, I've drawn all my lines. I wrote it in pencil first, then I came in with my marker, traced it over, and now I'm erasing my lines. And here is my scaled down visual aid, which is actually in real size. It is 11.25 by 22.5. Yay! So now we're going to do the big one, which is 17 by 22.5 inches. We're going to use the same measurements. Remember, this is just a guide, and you will make adjustments to suit the size of your visual aid and the number of words. But essentially, you should not go smaller in your letter size than these measurements, because it will be too small. It will be a bit too difficult for your students to read. And so, if it cannot fit all on one, then you can add another to go along with it. So when you're doing your memory verse, you can switch it out as you go along. So with this bigger visual aid, you can leave it whole, but it's quite big, or you can fold it. So for example, instead of switching it out, you can fold it in half, and so you'll show one half, and then as they continue to read, you'll show the other half. You'll flip it and you'll show the other half. So it's like turning a page, but we're not turning a page, you're just flipping it open or flipping it over, depending on how you hold it. So I'm using my same measurements, same size letters, and going to create this visual aid as well. The verse I'm using for this one is a little longer. It's Romans chapter 5 and verse 8, but we know that there are many verses that are much longer. Draw my lines. I measured, drew my lines, and now I'm writing in my words in pencil first, then I'm going to go over it in a marker. And each visual aid should have a border because it helps the reader keep their eyes focused on the words. When you don't have a border, it tends to look unfinished and the eyes could drift off of the page. But if you block it in with a border, and it doesn't have to be a fancy border, a very simple border, because you do not want to detract from the words. What you really want them to focus on are your words. So you keep your border very simple. You could probably do it, you don't have to do it too thin. You could do it a bit thick, but not too thick where it's detracting, and not too thin where they can't really see it. They must see it so that they can focus and narrow in and zero in on the words. So now my both visual aids are done. You hold it up and demonstrate. The one that flips though, it would flip open. It wouldn't flip closed like that. So when you are demonstrating, you will hold it with it flipped open. I'm going to do the actual size of the 11 and a quarter by 22 and a half. So you'll see how big it is. I'm using the exact same measurements for my border, for my words, and I'm using Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 8. As I've done before, I wrote out my lines, so I know how many lines I'm supposed to have. I know how many words in a line, and I look at it to make sure what I'm writing is what I wrote on my draft. So I'm measuring my lines now for all of my words. So I'm actually measuring the capital letters and the common letters and the space between the lines. Now, remember, you're not always going to have 9 lines. Sometimes you might have 10, sometimes you might have 12. So, even though these measurements are given, remember it's just a guide. So you can adjust to suit, look at it, you could draw your lines, stand back, look at it, check to see if it looks even, but you may have to decrease a little bit or add another visual aid to continue the rest of your verse. But you want to continue it where it's easy to read. You don't want to put part of a word on one visual and then it continues on another. And when you're reading it, you read it through so that where you pause naturally, that is where you will cut it, and then you can go and add on to the next visual aid. So you have to read it out loud and listen for your natural pauses as well, so that it will be easy to read for your students. If you draw a word and you realize it's not fitting, meaning that you started a little too far away from your margin, you can just erase and carry it further to the margin and then do it over. I also made some adjustments to my lines because I felt that the width of the common letters was a bit large. So I just carried it down by 1/4 of an inch. So it's still big, it's still readable, but it fits better on the page. So now I'm going to put my border in, just a thin line of black. Make sure, as you saw, my black marker was in a hot mess. Make sure that your markers are in good condition, that they're not dried out, that they're not skipping, so that you'll have nice smooth words and they won't detract from your visual and it won't distract your students when they're reading. Then you erase all your lines and you have your visual aid. And then you hold it up. See, it's like almost half of my body. So they can see that. And then you can also block out some of the words and have them read it and fill it in. And as they go along, you could remove it so that they'll know, hey, I got it right. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching this presentation from the North Branch of CEF in Trinidad and Tobago.